Take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Zohran Mamdani is officially the front runner to be the next mayor of New York City. He also, overnight, is one of the most controversial political figures in the country, second to Donald Trump, probably. Maybe not second, but I don't know. He's up there because now we have an openly socialist, democratic socialist, but a democratic socialist who does not flinch or hide from the word socialist, even when he is described as a socialist, and has embraced some, to be fair, pretty moderate socialist policies in his platform to be elected to mayor. And that's not a criticism. It's more of just kind of a reality check with all of this panicking that we're going to see over Zohran's win and what's he going to do. And this is a communist socialist takeover of America. I mean, these policies, what he's proposed is bold in terms of what the mayor is able to get away with and has the power to do, let alone, you know, what the norm has been in New York City and other cities up until now. But realistically, in the scope of what is considered socialism or democratic socialism, it's really, we're talking about moderate policies here. And that is the frustrating issue of where we are at in current American politics, because you have to be a socialist or a democratic socialist in order to even effectively advocate for the most modest liberal reforms. Like healthcare. Everyone should have healthcare. The buses should be free. People should have childcare. State-run grocery stores, which, to be fair, is probably the most unabashedly socialist policy that Zohran has. The idea that rather than groceries being commodified, which they still will be, they won't be decommodified, but the state offering groceries to people for free is essentially a socialization of those resources and the state taking responsibility for making sure people are fed. Now, there's a question, and I guess we're not at this point yet, although winning this primary was a huge step towards Zohran being the next mayor of New York City. Like I said, he is now the front runner. And we'll talk a little bit more about the dynamics of the race going forward in a second. We don't really know yet, but I think it's pretty clear unless something like shocking happens, which I suppose it could. But there are questions about, what is going to be the implementation of these policies? How long does this take? How effective is he going to be at getting this stuff done? He has been incredibly effective at running a campaign. He has been effective at some of the things that he's done in his political career so far. But in terms of the very dynamic job of running the city and dealing with different problems that come up, while also aggressively pursuing this agenda, it's a tough thing to do. And I suspect that if Zohran becomes mayor, roadblocks will come up, aside from the fact that he is being attacked from all directions, especially by Republicans, but also by Democrats, in the wake of his win of this Democratic primary. So Trump has chimed in about Zohran Mamdani already, pretty much once it became clear that he was going to win the primary. Trump posted this on his Truth Social platform, saying that Democrats have crossed the line. Zohran Mamdani is a 100% communist lunatic. He said, we've had radical lefties before, but this is getting ridiculous. Then a couple interesting statements. This is classic Donald Trump sort of manipulation, doublespeak. He says his looks are terrible. His voice is grating. He's not very smart. So I think what he's doing here, and you can kind of see him doing this often, anytime he's up against somebody politically that is actually talented, he's trying to diminish the things about Zohran that are the most impressive. His most impressive assets, his ability to communicate, his intelligence, the way he comes across on TV. That's not only the kind of thing that, works politically. Obviously, it got Zohran across the finish line so far, at least in the primary. But also it got Trump's attention. Trump pays attention to people who are good at TV and they're bombastic and they're, getting everybody talking about them. So it's not a surprise that Trump chimed in to talk about this. He's probably going to have more to say about Zohran Mamdani. Trump obviously has a special tie to New York as well, even though he doesn't even live there anymore. He moved to Florida. But still, Donald Trump's whole life, many court cases and all kinds of things are wrapped up in New York. So it's a relevant city to him. So I suspect that we will continue to hear him sound off on Zohran Mamdani, and even potentially we'll see them getting into it, as Zohran has promised that he's going to be combative when it comes to ICE and immigration and Donald Trump's agenda of, kidnapping people off the streets and deporting them. Zohran wants to fight him on this. And to what degree that can be done, I'm not sure. It seems so far, in the case of LA, like Trump is pretty much just sending the feds into these cities without permission of the mayor. I believe Stephen Miller is on record saying that what the mayor wants doesn't matter, that sort of thing. So, that's the type of federal overreach that we are dealing with. However, not only because Trump is a TV president, but also just because of the nature of politics and American culture in general is, I think the ability to have a loud voice and an energetic voice is probably the most important tool in standing up to a guy like Trump. Being loud about it, being able to command a lot of media attention about it and refocus the narrative that the entire nation is operating off of, that's the kind of thing that is going to sort of help push things in the right direction politically and apply some different types of pressures on the Trump administration. And it seems like that's what Zohran is aiming for. And so let's hope that he ends up being a strong enough leader to do that if he wins. And again, we'll get back to that. But real quick, I'll play. This is one of the most hopeful things that I've heard from Zohran so far in talking about Donald Trump and the current dynamics of American politics and the fact that a lot of voters in New York swung for Donald Trump in the election. Obviously, most of them knowing that it wasn't going to affect the actual outcome of the election. But there are a lot of people in New York, for instance, that voted for Donald Trump and AOC on the same ticket. It's just a strange phenomenon that happened in this previous election, specifically in New York. And Zohran not only paying attention to that, but diving into that issue and trying to figure out why these New Yorkers voted for Trump, I think led to a much more informed campaign. And here's what he had to say about that. This is one of my favorite things that I've heard from him so far.
At the national level, after the presidential election, we saw that New York was actually the state with the largest swing in the country towards Donald Trump, 11.5 points, and that swing took place far from the caricature of Trump voters, instead taking place in the hearts of immigrant New York City. And I went to those neighborhoods. I went to Fordham Road in the Bronx and Hillside Avenue in Queens, and I asked those New Yorkers, the vast majority of whom were Democrats, why they voted for Trump and what it would take to bring them back to the Democratic Party. And again, what I heard from them was cost of living, was an inability to afford the very things they recalled being able to purchase 4 years ago. And when they told me what it would take, they said again and again, a relentless focus on an economic agenda. And ultimately, in listening to them, we built a campaign that was explicitly about making this city affordable. And I think too often in politics, there's a desire to impose what you think the debate is upon the people that you're seeking to represent, as opposed to listening to the very issues that are making it difficult for them to keep calling the city that they love, the city that they live.
Yeah, so this is relevant here because not only is this the strategy that he used to win, but also with the juxtaposition between him and Trump, this cuts to the core of where the political situation is at currently in America. And despite Trump's brutishness, his bullishness, and his idiocy, it can't be denied that some of the most prevailing messages of his campaign were economy focused, and he was effectively able to convince people that he cared about stuff like egg prices and inflation. which obviously there's a whole other conversation to be had about how anybody found themselves back in a position of trusting Trump in the first place, especially considering that he completely tanked the economy before he left last time. Granted, COVID was involved as well, but it could have been handled much better than it was under Donald Trump. He left the country in shambles in many ways, and yet a lot of people still ended up being convinced by his message because they felt that he was the one that was lasering in on the things that they care about. And so the importance of focusing on something like eggs is that people can picture what having eggs means in their lives and what the difference in egg prices means to them on a day-to-day basis. And so what Zohran's getting at here, and I love the phrasing that he said, what New Yorkers were demanding, what they said would convince them to, move away from demagogues like Trump, is a relentless focus on economic issues. I love that, a relentless focus. And so the fact that Zohran has won on that basis gives me some hope that he not only plans to attempt to implement these things in New York, but that he is going to approach it with that relentlessness. And I think that is ultimately the way to get things done. I'm not sure how everything's going to pan out. This stuff is complicated. A lot of the stuff that he wants to do, like minimum wage and free buses, is not something that he has the ability as mayor to wave his magic wand and do. He has to deal with the state. He has to deal with neighboring cities. He has to, deal with the larger structure of power in New York than himself. However, being one of the most frontward facing people in the country, he has an enormous amount of bully pulpit power. And so it seems like that's what he intends to use. And it seems like it seems like a relentless approach to those issues, using the resources that he has, could make a lot of progress. I'm not sure if he'll be able to get done everything that he said he wants to. I suppose he could. It just depends on a few different things. But already you're seeing a lot of racist attacks from the right, from not only Donald Trump, but other Republicans. They are now trying to lay out potential justification to deport Zohran Mamdani. There's a group called the New York Young Republican Club that has called on the federal government to strip Zohran Mamdani of his citizenship. So he is a citizen, and they are saying that they want to begin denaturalization processes. So obviously in New York, that's not going to get anywhere. On the federal level, I don't know. Donald Trump could try it. We'll see. I think it probably depends on how much of a stick in Donald Trump's craw Zohran Mamdani actually ends up being. I think at this point, it's pretty clear that Trump wouldn't be able to pull off some stunt of like arresting him and deporting him or something like that. He might have been more tempted to try that a few months ago when he was doing stuff like that. However, even a college kid like Mahmoud Khalil and others like him, the federal government was forced to release them, and they didn't end up being able to make the example of them that they wanted to, other than sending them to jail essentially with no due process just because of things that they had said about Israel. So it's not impossible that we'll see those type of attacks from the federal government against Zohran Mamdani, but I think because of the prominence of his position, they'll be more hesitant to do that unless he really becomes an obstacle to them. And in which case, if he does, them escalating is only going to energize the opposition more. And so Zohran is right on the edge here of being like a real political symbol. And he could very well represent a completely new generation of leadership, which is what he says he wants to do very clearly. But look, it's a tough job. And right now, the entire national conversation is refocusing on the idea that Zohran, the radical leftist in New York, won by promising all of these crazy, terrible, radical leftist policies. And so what that means is that Zohran has to do a good job. And not just on delivering on the things that he's promised to deliver on, but he has to do a good job with the basic things that are gonna start to pile up, like waste management and yes, crime. If people start getting the perception that crime is worse in New York for this reason or that reason, Zohran is gonna be the one who gets blamed for that, whether he tries to avoid it or not. And that's the issue with being the mayor of a city like New York, is that there are perpetual problems like that. And it always gets blamed on the mayor, no matter who they are, no matter what their policies are. And so that's why really the only thing you can do is take a bold approach, because that's the only way you're going to actually make a dent in some of these like hugely systemic problems. So Zohran, our democratic socialist king, wanted to get into the system to try to make it better from the inside. And it looks like he's going to be there. It looks like he's going to be right there in the system. And if there's one thing that we know tends to happen, is that system either corrupts you or it makes it impossible for you to retain the principles that you had when you went into it. So far, that seems to be the reality. We will see if Zohran can bend that reality. He seems to be a relatively reality-bending candidate so far. Cuomo, it looks like, is going to stay in the race as an independent, as well as Eric Adams running against Zohran as an independent. And before, I was talking about that as like, this is an uphill battle for Zohran. And even if he wins the primary, he's still up against Adams. He still could potentially have to go up against Cuomo again. And it looks like that's going to be the case. However, things look different now. Zohran is in a much different position momentum-wise than he was even a month ago. And it doesn't really seem like on an independent level, Eric Adams or Andrew Cuomo is going to be able to garner the support necessary to beat him. They're gonna garner a lot of money for sure. There's gonna be plenty of money put into them. But now that the Democratic primary is lost, especially for Cuomo, I don't really understand why he thinks running in the general is going to give him any better of a chance. If you lost in the Democratic primary, you're not gonna win in the general without those voters that you couldn't win in the primary. And so, the idea that there's enough independent voters that will turn out and beat the Democratic nominee, especially one that there's a lot of excitement behind, I don't know. Maybe there will be an impressive turnout amongst independents. I think that is definitely highly likely, but I don't know. It seems like Zohran's going to win at this point. And the national conversation seems to have shifted to the idea that he will probably be the next mayor. Doesn't mean that that's absolutely what's going to happen. But Cuomo is sleepwalking and Eric Adams is doing interviews on Newsmax and Fox News. He called him a snake oil salesman on Fox News. So I'm not sure exactly who Eric Adams is aiming at this point, but it doesn't seem to be the demographic that's going to get him across the finish line in New York City. So it looks like the era of Mamdani is upon us. May he reign for 1,000 years, and we'll see how it goes. Other than that, it looks like they're trying to build some kind of new facility called Alligator Alcatraz. I believe they're building this in Florida. And this is why people were saying that we had to stop Cop City from being built in Atlanta. They were building a giant compound where police could train, and there were protesters there for months getting arrested. They got charged with RICO for racketeering because they were passing out flyers. The state pulled out all the stops to make sure this was built as protesters were trying to prevent it. The narrative never really caught on nationally. And so now Cop City is built, and they are attempting to build this, what looks like it's going to be a concentration camp in Florida for, I suppose, what Trump calls the homegrowns, where they can arrest a bunch of people with no due process and send them there. And so they're probably waiting until they have more facility like this before they start really going after people who are not necessarily being deported on some immigration basis, but maybe for things that they've said or being a dissident in some form. So that's the reality that we're looking at soon. They're building this in Florida. We have to resist this by any means necessary. We have to. And we failed to stop them from building Cop City, and so they're building more of these compounds across the nation. And that's how the police are able to prepare themselves to essentially do warfare with American citizens at the slightest hint of any protest. They're using these Cop Cities to train themselves and arm themselves. Increasingly, that's the reality we're looking at. there's a glimmer of hope in the momentum that carried Zohran Mamdani across the finish line, but that is in New York, and we've got a big country to try to turn the tides on. I think Trump's authoritarianism will go a long way towards turning that tide, but it means that we all have to stay vigilant, stay loud, not shut up, don't be scared, don't get arrested, and stay alive. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews. I'm reading Catcher in the Rye right now. I'm probably going to review that on there. Also posting music early. I've got a couple EPs out that were available first for members only. Right now, there's a couple tracks on there. There's a freestyle by me and my buddies Wrecked and Psych. So if you want access to all that, different podcasts and other stuff, become a member. And if there's other kinds of content that you'd like to see for members only stuff, then let me know and we'll work some things out.